Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Herbal Knowledge Keepers. And I'm Blue Star Deer Woman, and I'm co-hosting with Dakota Granny Woman. And we have a follow-up show after having done a session with Jan Wiley. We had brought in his very rich database collecting sources of intelligence, specifically on hurricanes and storms. And now Dakota is going to make links to the herbal database, which is the basis of this show, this ongoing episodes. And we're going to be talking about what are some of the preventative things or preparation things that we can do in the event that we are in a hurricane and the aftermath of a hurricane, like we've had most recently down in Florida, Texas, Puerto Rico. So welcome to our show. And if you like, you can enter come into the chat room and ask questions. So let us begin.
In response to the hurricanes in Texas this year, a group of herbalists who are really active in community herbalism got together to help out. Nicole Telks and Ginger Webb and a bunch of other fine herbalists have formed an Herbal Aide group, and it's ongoing for Gulf Coast residents. The hurricanes are going to be ongoing. We know they're coming back, and now we have a very fine organization in the works to help out, and it's going to be ongoing. So this is a website that they're really just starting, Herbal Aid, and they're going to be working on it through it'll be really taking off next year. So just this is the beginning of it here, and I'm just kind of scrolling through some of this. Um, I'm going to just click back and show you the Gulf Coast Herbal Aid. And this first tab here is their Facebook group. I'm just going to click on this second link, which is their site on Tumblr. And if you live in the area and need some help, check this out. You can see the web address up here at the top. They have free counseling. They provide supplies. They're fabulous. And I think Florida needs something like this. So if any of you folks are watching from Florida, you could get together with this group, this Gulf Coast group, and then Herbalists Without Borders is doing similar work. So please come by here and take a look at this. So this is all in the database, of course. And bravo to you guys there in Texas. You're doing a great job. This section of the database covers water in many, many different ways, from the floods to structuring water to survival water procurement, how to find a spring, water purification. So this is a good place to start. And I'm going to open up the information panel to an article that gives us a starting place in the kinds of things that folks are going to be dealing with. We see flesh-eating bacteria, cancer-causing chemicals, and mold, the lingering health threats. So how do we deal with those? Let's just kind of dig into that. First of all, as far as the cancer-causing chemicals go, we don't know what all was released from the Superfund sites or the petrochemical plants, or in the case of Florida, it was really a lot of sewage. But if you can imagine, in this kind of flooding, household chemicals are being spilled out, all kinds of chemicals are being dumped into the water supply. A lot of that was washed out to the ocean, but it lingers, and folks who were wading around in those waters exposed themselves to a lot of this. And then, of course, drinking water becomes an issue too. So we're going to take a look at all of that. Now, we do know about a few of these chemicals that were released, and we'll dig into those a little bit. First of all, arsenic, and I'm going to pull arsenic up. So, one of the toxic heavy metals that was reported to have been released into the environment was arsenic, and we're already exposed to quite a bit of arsenic. Now, as far as this extra release, we don't know where it wound up. Some of it may have seeped into the soil, a lot of it probably ran off into the ocean. However, because this is something that we really are dealing with on almost a daily basis, it's good to be aware of this possibility of an increased exposure to it. Now, when I say daily life, just take a look at some of the things that expose us to arsenic. Beer. Of course, we know about the commercial chicken feed and the chickens eating chickens as a source. Rice also. It's in cosmetics, fungicides, paints, pesticides. It's in the soil, and it's even in table salt where it's used as a non-caking agent. And yes, it is in tap water. It's not all removed. So, and wood preservatives, yeah, treated wood. Imagine treated wood being submerged under floodwaters, possibly releasing arsenic into the yards. If you have a vegetable garden or anything like that, just be aware there may be some arsenic now in the soil as a result. So, what do we do about it? Well, fortunately, I guess this has been a topic of a lot of research to figure out how to help people. Part of that came from Bangladesh, where there was a huge problem with arsenic in the drinking water. Um, we know it causes cancer, but take a look at some of the other symptoms that can arise from arsenic, and abdominal pain, brittle nails, diarrhea, drowsiness. Who would imagine that any of these things might be a result of arsenic? So there's quite a bit. Kidney damage, sore throat, vomiting. We see here that arsenic replaces nutrient minerals in enzyme binding sites, and so these metals can inhibit, overstimulate, or otherwise alter thousands of enzymes. And so that's why there's such a wide array. Now, let's just go right into what we can do about it. So, we've got, let me close this down for a second. We know that beta carotene available through fruits and vegetables helps to reduce the impact of arsenic on the body. So, that's an easy place to start, just really eating more fruits and vegetables. And then we've got from research that was done in India, they discovered that the curcumin in turmeric was able to not only within 3 months lower the levels of arsenic in people in India who had these high levels, but in fact, it lowered it down to baseline. And it also worked to help repair DNA that had been damaged by arsenic. Ginger powder also helped, so the combination of turmeric and ginger and fruits and vegetables would be a really great, easy place to start. Now we know that pomegranate is useful because it helps to reduce the inflammation. A lot of the damage done by arsenic is due to something called creating reactive oxygen species, and some of these things help to tone that down. Moringa leaf also works, so if you have moringa around, moringa leaf extract, you could make a moringa leaf extract and use that. And then we've got a couple of supplements to take a look at. There is something called BioSil, which is a biologically available silica supplement, And one of the strategies is to start off by taking that for a while and then adding modified citrus pectin. And that combination chelates the arsenic and takes it right out of the body. Kelp can also help. One of the things I should mention about turmeric, you want to be careful about, in fact, I'm going to click that open. You want to be careful about where you're getting that, because it turns out that a lot of the turmeric powders that have been sold on the market are contaminated themselves with heavy metals. And so, under turmeric cautions, I'm just going to open that up real quickly. And here is a group that analyzed different commercially available turmeric powders and identified those that were contaminated and which ones were safer. The non-organic brands perform better in the test, believe it or not. So get into the database and take a close look at all of the research on turmeric, how to use it, and that sort of thing. That will help you out. But dealing with with arsenic really is something that we have to do just as part of our daily life now. And there are some videos here that you can watch and that show you where it comes from. It's in rice, mushrooms, wine. And then let's just take a quick look at this other video. And this one tells us about cancer risk from rice and seaweed. And that's really sad, because we see here that kelp should be able to help us reduce the effects of arsenic in our body, but it can itself be a problem. So in the database, when you go to the section on kelp, you'll learn where to find kelp that is safe. And then we've got another video we see here where you can find arsenic in rice milk, Rice Krispies, brown rice syrup, and so let's move on to cadmium. That's something that apparently was released, and let's just pull that up. Now, this dark gray color in the database means it's something that's toxic or poisonous. So again, in the information panel over here, we have a number of studies and different videos that help us learn more about cadmium toxicity and different things that help the body deal with that, either by directly removing it from the body or minimizing its effects. So there are really quite a few foods. I'm going to close the info panel so you can see everything. Here we're looking at a number of regular foods like dark green leafy vegetables, parsley leaf, strawberries. You want to make sure strawberries are organic. That's one of the most heavily sprayed plants or fruits with pesticides, so be careful about that. But whole grain foods, black seed, nigella, again modified citrus pectin, again moringa. Um, some of these are a little more obscure, like the guduchi, but if you use Ayurvedic herbs and you have that around, pull it out for cadmium. The vegetarian diet is there mostly in terms of that being a diet that just is normally low in cadmium. Cadmium is a very powerful carcinogen. And then we have again some of the phytochemicals that help. So here we see some things that you might have around if you have zinc supplements. Zinc is really helpful for a number of these heavy metals. Vitamin E, vitamin C, CoQ10, resveratrol, naringenin, imidin, and in the database you can click on those and see what they where you can find them. And some of the side effects of cadmium toxicity, it tends to lead to breast cancer and osteoporosis. That's just a couple of things. So let's go on to, let's see now, they said that there was, now this is not a heavy metal, but dioxin from a paper mill that was flooded. And I think probably in those Superfund sites too, because dioxin was outlawed. And by the way, there are a lot of different dioxins. There's not just one. It's kind of terms that covers all of these different dioxins, and it's very, very poisonous. You could learn more about it over here, dioxins and dioxin-like compounds. So for that, we're looking at cabbage, and that shouldn't be too hard to get a hold of. Perea leaf, we've got a lot of perea leaf growing as an invasive here in Arkansas, and I don't know if it grows in Texas. It's probably there too, and Florida. Again, you have to be careful where you're picking these things if it's been contaminated. But if you can get wild greens, just, plantain, all kinds of wild greens, they help remove that. And different types of propolis. Chlorella, you may have chlorella around. And cacao. Again, we come up with green tea, but the matcha is the type of green tea that does a better job with detoxing dioxin and turmeric once again. So, a lot of us are using turmeric. Okay, so we know that one of the ongoing issues for folks is going to be dealing with mold issues. And we've got an article here from the Atlantic which points out that these hurricanes the after effects are going to affect people for a long time. The looming consequences of breathing mold, and you can read this. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the information in the notes panel here. And in fact, let me open it up all the way, and you can read along with me. Um, it can trigger autoimmune diseases, and some people are genetically more vulnerable to mold illnesses. You have to remove the source of the mold illness, and remediating it can be very, very expensive. Those who got sick from mold become hypersensitive to it and get sicker quicker. Now, intermittent fasting is recommended just because that can help lower inflammation. Removing the mercury amalgam fillings is useful if you can afford it, because the mercury is impairing your immune system. There's some other information here. Testing for mold spores isn't an accurate test, and remediation is done professionally using negative air pressure. And some people who are sensitive to mold become sensitive to chemicals, and so when those homes are remediated, often they'll use chemicals that are pretty harsh, and folks can react to that. So when we're thinking of mold, often what comes to mind is black mold. And black mold is kind of a catch-all term describing molds that are colored black, and not all of them are really toxic. The one that is the aspergillosis cause. That aspergillosis is the name of the condition that comes from the aspergillus fungi, and that's real common. So here in this section, we can take a look at some of the plants and plant products that can help folks who are dealing with this. And so ashwagandha will help protect from systemic infection. Honey inhibits there are different species of the aspergillus. The aspergillus niger can be inhibited with using honey. And let me just use the scroll bar to show a few others. Yarrow, um, marjoram, noni, spillantes. There are a few essential oils. This is the color of essential oils. Angelica, cinnamon, clove, geranium, thyme essential oil. If your vitamin D levels are good, you're not going to be quite as sensitive to mold. Even cayenne pepper can help. And so we have in the content area a bunch of videos about this problem and solutions for it. Um, Stephen Buhner recommends some different herbs, 3 formulas. Hujuna is active against different, and that's a really interesting herb. It's active against different species of aspergillus. So you can also turn to usnea, black walnut, and oregano oil. So while there are plants to use that really help to tone this down, ultimately you do have to leave the mold infested home or get it remediated. Here's a whole section on detoxing mold. Toxic mold illness is a name of a term that is dealing with these really, really lethal molds that are creating lots of mycotoxins. And a couple of solutions for that are intranasal xylitol and intranasal N-acetylcysteine.
To develop, like for instance, where there wasn't mold, and
Yeah.
how much length of time being exposed to water?
4 to 48 hours.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. And
That's
once
quick.
people get, yeah, and you can't always tell that it's there. You know, we're kind of sensitive to that smell, and is off-gassing of mycotoxins. And we may get into that. This could be a whole show on mold. So this is a good site to go to for information on remediation of mold. It's moldremedy.biz, B-I-Z, and there's a lot of misconception about how to deal with mold. Absolutely do not use bleach on it. And the new homes aren't necessarily better because in the 70s we found up super insulating buildings, and what happened was humidity got inside along with chemicals in the home. And so those homes are a problem for growing mold for a completely different reason. So other tabs that you can go to, how to test for it. If you still have to live in that house that most likely has a mold issue, it's wearable air purifiers so that the air you're breathing is cleaned. Those mycotoxins can enter through the lungs, through the skin, through the food. And we have also some issues with getting rid of the inflammation. That's where intermittent fasting can help. Oregano essential oil comes in here, and that's one of the things. Usually I don't really go for the essential oil so much because they are using an awful lot of plant material to make a very small amount of product, but you can carry those things around. So if you know that you're in a flood-prone area, you might have them in your medicine kit and keep that kit around and handy. So oregano essential oil is one of the better ones for toxic mold. Also holy basil and pau de arco. Those are, of course, are not as essential oils so much.
One of the concerns that came up, particularly in Florida, because there were at least 2 cases that I know of where people died from this, is what we call flesh-eating disease. And the fancy word for that is necrotizing fasciitis. It's caused by MRSA, that's methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. Now, it doesn't always uh, result from MRSAs, but it can. And MRSA is all over the place. The one that is more likely to be of concern in hurricane territory where there's seawater is the one from Vibrio. Now, we just want to stop here for a moment and point out there in this particular video, we see that one of the interesting symptoms of this flesh-eating disease is that the skin on the surface seems fine, but under the skin you can tell tissues being eaten away. Now, what puts folks at risk here is that seawater that's come in with a hurricane that's carrying Vibrio, because this type of Vibrio, the Vibrio vulnificus, lives in seawater. And if you have some kind of scratch or any lesion in the skin that's been exposed to any seawater carrying this type of Vibrio, there is a chance that you could develop this. Now, it tends to happen more often in people who have an compromised immune system of some kind. So I'm just going to click on Vibrio. We're not going to talk about MRSA right now, just Vibrio, because this is the one that we're focused on with this type of hurricane. So we do fortunately have a couple of things that have been tested out on preventing this type of infection. One of them is cumin essential oil, and this again is something for those of you living near seawater where there could be hurricanes bringing in this Vibrio. You might add this cumin essential oil to your medicine kit, especially the Tunisian. Now, they might all be just equally affected, the different versions of cumin essential oil, but this is the one that was tested, and it was found to be highly effective against various Vibrio strains. So that's just something to keep in mind. And if you had that cumin essential oil and you were wading through those flood waters, you thought you might have some type of lesion, just treating it topically. Now, with essential oils, we dilute them. We don't use them straight on the skin, so we dilute them in a type of carrier oil, and that could be something just as simple as olive oil or maybe coconut oil or something like that. And there are instructions on dilution here in the database. Just bear in mind that you do have a preventative in the plant world. Now, another one, once again, is curcumin, and that was tested in an animal study. We can infer that because it worked there, it may also work on humans, and it's protective. So with the curcumin, you could, if you have turmeric powder, you could make a turmeric poultice, or if you're growing the root around there and it wasn't exposed to all these different toxins, you could grind some of it up and make a poultice on that area.
If you have that tree growing around you, collect the seeds, because the moringa seeds can be used to purify water. The Egyptians used them. They would crush the seeds up. I'm talking about the ancient Egyptians. They would crush the seeds and rub the insides of their drinking vessels with the seeds to keep the water clean. And what it's doing is, as you see here, killing the waterborne bacteria. And so that's one of the things that you could do. Keep those seeds if you have moringa growing around you. There are a number of different ways of purifying water, and that's one of the other big issues. Now, it's not so easy to take out the cadmium and the arsenic and that sort of thing, but we're interested in bacteria that's in the water. We know that in Florida especially, there was a lot of sewage released into the water, and there cleaning the water is, you probably all know about using, boiling the water, that sort of thing. But you might be thinking in terms of doing something a little different. For example, you can make sand filtration devices. Let's say you don't have a water filtration system. You can make them using sand. Now, of course, you don't, in a hurricane, you don't know what's in the sand to begin with. So that's the sort of thing you would want to prepare in advance with clean materials. You can also extract water directly from trees, and you'll find videos online about how to collect water from the tree itself by putting, for example, a plastic bag over the limb of a tree, and there will be water that would be released in the bag for drinking water. And I hope they're doing that in Puerto Rico. It's not a lot of water, but it is water. And you can do another method called solar distillation, where you dig a hole in the ground and you lay a plastic sheet over that hole. There's a bowl that's placed in the hole, and you put a rock over the center of the plastic sheet so that the water that's evaporating can condense and drip into the bowl. And so there are different techniques that you can use to get water. And there's the other thing that is an issue that Jan brought up is the emotional and psychological. So we have issues with PTSD that arise in a situation like this, and it may not pop up immediately. It could be months later. You might feel fine initially, and then you start experiencing unusual symptoms that you can't put your finger on why. You can't sleep, or you're having bad dreams, that sort of thing. And one of the interesting things about PTSD, in 9/11, they did a lot of research. They used it as an opportunity to study the effects of traumatic events on people, and they discovered that when there's a traumatic event, the people who have low cortisol are most likely to suffer from PTSD later. I don't think it's just interesting. Most of us think of cortisol as something that we want to keep low, but if your cortisol is too low, you are more vulnerable to having a PTSD effect from something like this.
What creates cortisol in our bodies? What enhances it?
Produced by the adrenal glands in response to stress. And normally we get just the right amount. But one of the things that can happen is people who have chronic stress for a long time stop producing enough cortisol. They wind up with low cortisol. It's pretty complicated, but the cortisol connection is a big issue in terms of PTSD. So one of the things that, just thinking in terms of simple things to help people deal with stress immediately, are to turn towards the herbal, we call them nervines. And there are some, these would be good to put in your first aid kit. So we have, for example, wood betony. And wood betony tincture is really, really good to help ground you when you've gone into a kind of a state of shock over an event. And so that's one that I would recommend that you put in your first aid kit. Thinking in terms of a first aid kit for preparing for something like this, and because we know the hurricanes are going to come back, having prepared in advance a low-tech system of water purification, such as you'll find in the database, having in your medicine kit a few essential oils like tea tree oil. A lot of people have that. They know about it. The oregano essential oil is particularly good against the mold. And the nervines like skullcap tincture, wood betony tincture, and you don't need to take a lot of it, just a few drops held in the mouth will help to keep you calm and help your nerves. And then another technique that's really useful for trauma, which doesn't cost anything, is yogic breathing. If you go to the database, you'll find all kinds of instruction on yogic breathing and the science behind it and how it can help to prevent the negative effects of trauma on the body and help to center you. So that's something that you can put yogic breathing in your first aid kit. In terms of other things, garlic, we know, has been used forever. And I can see the chat now. It is written down in the database. The garlic, and one of the things you can do with garlic is, because garlic doesn't necessarily keep a long time, if you buy a bunch of cloves of garlic, what do you do with it then? Some people have a difficult time eating it, but you need the raw garlic. And so I recommend fermenting garlic in a 2% brine solution. That's something you could quickly grab up, and you could apply it topically or take it internally. And it's just an all-purpose antimicrobial, antifungal. It helps in many, many ways. Doesn't cost a lot, something most people can do. Now, one of the things they used to do in the old days that still works is the use of vinegar. So, for example, up through World War I, maybe even into World War II, the soldiers kept vinegar on the battlefield to cleanse their wounds. That's a big issue if you've been injured. You have an open wound and there are those contaminated floodwaters around you. So having vinegar, and of course we know about Four Thieves vinegar, which is even better if you can brew some of that up. Again, the recipes for that are all over the place. But even if you haven't prepared that way and all you can get is vinegar, doesn't have to be raw apple cider vinegar. It could be really any vinegar. But keep that around. Think of grabbing that up, having it nearby, and using that topically on your skin if you think that there's maybe, you have some kind of a lesion on your skin. It's been exposed and you need to clean it, or even for, open wounds. So there's a whole section on first aid in the database. That's something folks really need to get a handle on ahead of time.
And is that, what category do we follow, Dakota, on the database to get to that first aid? Is it just first aid for hurricane?
You look up first aid, and then there's a /EMS, emergency medical. Okay. Complete instruction is there. Because in these situations, people can become, who have health problems, they can be exacerbated, and the healthcare facilities are overwhelmed. So we need to know what to do.
We're hearing that. I agree with Jan. It's almost like just a list of that and getting out in the social network would be just so valuable. I mean, it's just such simple things that are probably still hanging around in those disaster areas.
Yeah. Now, another thing to mention is activated charcoal. Not expensive. And if you have reason to believe that you drank some bad water or for whatever reason, now activated charcoal is wonderful to drink and to use externally. You can make a charcoal poultice.
Yeah.
And that's pretty easy to do. Even if you don't have any clean cloth around, you can use plants, like if there's a broadleaf plant, take that plant leaf and moisten some charcoal if you have the means, and bind it around the wound. That'll help to clean it out. Drinking that powder, I wouldn't really, well, you could have the capsules if it's convenient, but definitely activated charcoal is absolutely essential. Now let's say you don't have activated charcoal. In the old days, we used just charcoal from fires, and it's not quite as effective. But if you have some charcoal, wood charcoal from a fire, sometimes in areas, I don't know, do they have coconut palms in Puerto Rico?
Yeah,
one of the best types of activated charcoal comes from the charred coconut hulls. And so with that, of course, what you have to do is pound it up as fine as you can, which isn't easy.
Okay. So
but taking that...
A question we need to ask then is, how do you make charcoal activated?
That's difficult. There is a way, and the only way I know, which is not easily done, is you have to have a can that, like, how to describe it, like there are some cans that products come in that have a metal lid that inserts down into the can, kind of, where it seals it. Can't remember what products have that, but some do. If you have a can like that, say, but not the plastic lids, but the metal lid that inserts down into the can, and you take your charred wood and put a piece of charred wood in that can with a little bit of water, and then you have to put that in a very hot stove Wood stove is what I used to use in the wilderness, and keep that can in the stove as long as you can. And the water acts on the charcoal in such a way as to activate it. And what that means is it just changes the structure a little bit of the charcoal so that it can hold more. And then, of course, you do your best to powder it as finely as you can. Now, another thing I would say is in those areas, and I'm thinking in terms of people who are just don't have anything, you know, and they're sick and they are wondering what to do. There are probably trees are still left standing, and the trees can be very, very helpful. So, for example, if you have juniper, and I know in Texas they have juniper, and they really hate it because it's the type of juniper that is more allergenic, but it's a very powerful medicine. So, if you can find a juniper tree and you take some of those twigs and leaves and decoct them, in other words, low heat cooking for a while, you make a solution that will sterilize things. And you could use that to sterilize, again, wounds or surfaces or drinking vessel. Let's say, you know, you're not sure that your drinking vessels are clean. You can insert those into that juniper decoction. And in fact, in Norway for the longest time, maybe even still today, they used a juniper decoction to sterilize their brewing equipment. You can use that if you have juniper around. Just remember the juniper tree can really save you in a situation like this. Very antiseptic. The other tree that you can use is pine. It's not quite the antiseptic power of juniper, but it'll still work. And another thing that pine will do is if you drink a beverage made out of the pine needle, it's a very, very high source of vitamin C, which is something that we rely on to overcome all kinds of infections. The immune system needs vitamin C. That's one way that you can help yourself. And there's a lot of other things in the pine that help to fight different kinds of infections. Definitely the first aid kit. And I already covered some things that should go in it. Now, if there's diarrhea problems, which can happen, the activated charcoal will help a lot with that, of course, too. But there are a number of other herbs, like astringent herbs, that can help, that might be useful to put into your first aid kit, like agrimony herb, or is really good for, especially if it's looking like a chronic type of a diarrhea. And of course, having your wound ointments, we can go on and on. The first aid kit can be pretty extensive, and this is a good time to get started on preparing that. And definitely think in terms of the herbal products for your first aid kit, because they're very, very effective.
Yeah.
Any comments or questions in the chat? I can see you guys
Yeah,
there.
that's what I was going to invite, if there's any particular questions. That's nice. Thank you, Robin.
Hi, Robin. Good to see you. I think the main thing, like we talked about with Jan, is these storms are not over. And boy, if you can move out of those areas, it would be a really good idea. I just saw a report recently that there are a couple of huge icebergs melting rapidly in Antarctica, and it's estimated that they're responsible for holding enough water back to keep the oceans 11 feet lower, and that they're melting rapidly, which means that the ocean's going to rise 11 feet, if their facts are correct. And if the ocean comes up 11 feet, these areas, they're just not really a good place to make your home. I'm sorry to say that, but those are the facts. We have to be thinking ahead in terms of the way that our world is changing and prepare ourselves in a lot of different ways. Again, creating groups to help others, the way the Gulf Coast Herbal Group is doing is fabulous, and we need more of those. There's another group called Herbalists Without Borders that supports that type of volunteer work. We have a lot of herbalists that go out and help with first aid, kind of like a guerrilla herbalism that make a huge difference. We have herbs that, depending on where you are, can make, like, stop bleeding, all kinds of things. But one of the issues is when you're in an area that's been inundated with the floods from a hurricane, and they're Superfund spillages and all that sort of thing, you don't know how contaminated the growing plants or the soil is that you're dealing with. So go for the trees.
Yeah.
They're up above, maybe,
All survival kicks in.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Oh, here we go. I have rainwater collection at my house, so I am always interested in how to keep my water supply clean. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Now, there's another old technique I'll throw out there, which I did in the wilderness. I had spring that had a spring house, and I was fortunate to have some silver bullion, and I kept the silver bullion in the spring because that's one of the old ways that they used to keep water purified, was they would put silver metal in it. And so, Robin, if you have some extra silver laying around, you might, it's a good place to hide it. Nobody will look for it down there, right? But that's another thing that you can do.
Yeah, I'm visualizing, you make a little pouch, you put silver in and a string.
No pouch. No, you just throw the metal open, those little, you've seen those beautiful little silver bars. You just toss those into the water supply.
Well, just in case you wanted to keep your silver.
Yeah, drop it in the tank.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And another thing about silver was that's one of the reasons why in the old days they used silver in their their eating implements, was again because it had an ability to prevent bacterial growth. Drop it in the tank.
Sure.
But I don't agree with using colloidal silver or nano silver or any of those kind of silvers internally. I used to believe in it. Yeah. I thought it was great. And then I learned more and discovered it's not a good idea. That's a whole other show. Yeah. Don't do the silver. Even the silver bandages I thought were great, but they'll actually cause tissue damage. Use trees.
Well, unless there's other questions, Dakota, I think that it might be time to have closure.
Thank you guys for joining us. We'll follow up with this. We're going to have Jan back to talk about air pollution. I think our next show.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone. And just a reminder that, this is a full bloom production and it's a nonprofit 501c3. We can accept non-taxed donations. And this is one of our main episodes right now, is the Herbal Knowledge Keepers. So keep coming back and visiting us, and look in the Herbal Knowledge Keepers Facebook group page, and you'll find the updates and ongoing conversation.